All right, live once again, early in the morning on a Thursday as I'm recording this. And in this live stream, I want to share and go over some topics that I've been asked about quite a lot over the last year or so, and things that I've personally spent a lot of time looking at and trying to understand and really make sense of. Because for me, when there are certain predominant, really influential trends or dynamics in the world, for whatever reason, I like to look into them and try to understand them and make some order out of the chaos or some sense out of the senselessness so that then I can relate to and adapt to and understand that thing accurately for what it is. And then once I can do that, kind of like close the tab and move on with something else. So that's what I wanted to share with you in this particular live stream and go over basically the predominant overarching dynamics that I see in online dating, and then talk about the second piece of it, which is the actual psychological mechanisms that underlie sex for most people and how that interfaces and relates, and how, if we're trying to personally develop or improve ourselves or have success in dating or just understand the craziness and the insanity, how we can do these things. And then last, I'll talk about how this relates to spirituality. So, first off, I just want to say, of course, what I'm saying and what I'm going to say is not 100% true 100% of the time, obviously. Things are a bell curve. So, if we have the majority of the bell curve, not everyone is on it, not everything is on that. So, if you talk about the majority of the bell curve, doesn't mean there aren't people that are outliers. I say this because a lot of people's logical wiring is constructed in such a way that, for example, if I said it's raining outside and you're like, well, no, it's not raining here, or it's not raining everywhere on the planet at the same time. So what you're saying is not true. I'm like, well, no, like within the limited context that I'm defining and that I'm speaking towards, these things are true under these certain conditions and these parameters. So when I look outside, it is raining. That doesn't mean I'm saying it's raining everywhere all the time across the entirety of human history. I just say that because sometimes people have a difficulty in discerning overarching dynamics of things that might be true 70% of the time, 80% of the time, and thus be very impactful. But then because it's not 100% true 100% of the time, they think, oh, well, no, it's not true. So what I mean is, of course, within online dating, of course, there are genuine people genuinely looking for love and connection with other genuine people. Of course, absolutely. There are people that find success in these endeavors. There are a lot of genuine people that you can meet and have great experiences with that can be enriching and can support your life and their life, of course. So I just want to put that at the beginning to set the clarity and the context of what I'm saying. Some people succeed in these endeavors of online dating, but the reality is that most people don't. I think that's kind of obvious. I think that's sort of implicit. And if it wasn't, then these dating apps would more or less go out of business and they wouldn't have a growth curve that's like this. They wouldn't be continually expanding and getting continually more profitable if more and more people weren't using them more often, more of the time. So that's just the reason why dating apps are able to keep growing and being more profitable. In a similar way, we can make a comparison to like many aspects of modern medicine. Obviously, not all aspects all the time, but there's no denying that there's a huge piece of modern medicine that kind of keeps people sick because that's more profitable. Because if someone comes in and you just cure them or get rid of whatever they're dealing with and you never see them again, that's not very profitable. But if you can get them on something that will keep them more or less handicapped for their entire life, then now you have a lifetime customer. So you have a much larger profit stream. And then if you can keep creating newer profit streams and newer market sectors and newer targets and demographics through diversification and through inventing new problems and through possibly introducing new toxins and new pollutants into the environment that then creates a whole set of other diseases that you have medications for. That's a very profitable thing. I think online dating and dating apps are a similar thing. I don't think necessarily on purpose. I think it's just humans in general are kind of dim and we do things that sound cool in the moment. What we don't consider their wider impacts of how they might interrelate and how those things might play out over 5, 10, 20 years and the way it might permeate through many other aspects of life. We tend to not do that when we make decisions. So I think online dating is a symptomology of a much larger uh, issue, a much larger disease that's occurring in our society. And I think there's many components within our society that keep people sick, that keep people dysfunctional, and then they just stay on this profitable hamster wheel because they are chronically internally imbalanced and deficient, which means they need more from the world. They need to buy more, they need to consume more, they need more support from therapy and mental health professionals and psychiatric medications and drugs and plant medicines and stimulants of all manner of shapes and sizes because internally they are just lacking, which is very profitable. And then you have mindsets and psychologies permeating through the media that sets people up to be ineffective and unable to effectively relate to people that are even interested in a romantic way. You have all these chemicals and pollutants in the environment that disrupt people's hormones so they can't even think correctly. Then you have all this aggressive sexual imagery and conflicting information from the media that keeps people also internally flipped and twisted so that maybe their actual natural level of desire is distorted, or maybe their actual natural preferences are distorted. So, as an example, you create a lot of men that are just hypersexualized and chronically masturbating all the time. Similar thing with women, which is not really natural and not really what we should be doing. But because of all of these factors, this just becomes people's default state, which prevents them from even being able to relate and exist functionally with other human beings at all. So that's kind of a wider context of just how online dating is just a symptomology of a much larger societal web of interconnections that really we're all dealing with. So, to get more specific and more granular and to dial down to the actual point of what I want to talk about in this thing, is that I think I've been able to really sum up and simplify and clarify the overarching dynamics for modern online dating right now. And then also how it relates to like porn and OnlyFans and all of those things as well. And I think it goes a little something like this. Men tend to trend towards, on one extreme, being simps and wimps. Usually, if they're weak or they don't have much status or power, they're wimps, they're simps, they're just really ineffective, not very strong, highly emotionally reactive. They're just indulging their desires all the time. They have no real moral fabric, they have no direction, they have no purpose, they have no aim. They're just chronically overwhelmed by their feelings all the time, playing video games, doing porn, and just kind of caught up existing in this way that's very childlike or very feminine, to put it in another way, in the sense of just caught up in their emotions all the time and serving their desires and their whatever their whims and flights of fancies might be. That's on one extreme. And on the other extreme, we have maybe guys that trend towards being a bit more domineering or exploitative because maybe they have some modicum of power or influence or status, or maybe they just look better. Basically, they have something that enables them to just behave in this way. But the fact of the matter is that both of these extremes of wimps and simps, or just kind of domineering, exploitative guys, they both share the same decrepit, degenerated moral platform. They're both two sides of the same coin of kind of degeneracy and perversion and weakness in another way. But it just expresses in different ways because some people can and some people can't, or some people can and some people can't. So the guy, the wimps and the simps are mad and sad and upset because they can't be like this guy. And then this guy is just kind of, I don't, I mean, just basically doing whatever they want, getting away with it, and being really supported and enabled in that through whatever capacity of power or wealth or status, or could be good looks, or it could be a number of different things that just allow them to behave in that manner. So that's one side of that coin. Whereas women on similar extremes tend to trend towards, on one end, extreme kind of just childishness, selfishness, where it's not really like, it's not malignant necessarily, it's not coming from a bad place. It's just really kind of childish and self-absorbed and not really based in maturity. And then on the other extreme, you have ladies that trend towards narcissism, because again, just like the domineering, controlling guy, maybe they have some degree of status or power that allows them to do that, which is then supported and enabled by the other, a lot of other people from a similar from a similar degree of dysfunction. So I think social media influencers and OnlyFans and like porn stars, I think would pretty easily function and illustrate this degree of narcissism. Meaning, like, if the vast majority of your waking life and your identity is taking pictures of yourself and being rewarded for how you look, and basically being rewarded for something that you probably didn't really strive and struggle to gain. Maybe you inherited it, maybe you did work to get it, sure, because there, of course, are people that do that. But it's basically that becomes your whole identity. It's just your physical appearance. And then a bunch of weak simp guys are validating your appearance. And then that's your identity. Of course, that's going to eventually eat away at the fabric of your soul. But it's really, again, just like with the men, it's two sides of the same demoralized, degenerate sort of mindset of the haves and the have-nots and the cans and the can'ts, where it's like, kind of the wimpy, simpy, just kind of really self-absorbed, immature, childish women who maybe don't have the power or the status. They kind of compare themselves to the high level narcissist women physically. Oh, I wish I was pretty as them, or wish I got the attention that they got, or wish I could do what they do. And it's just kind of this very similar dynamic as what occurs with the men, where the people, the can'ts and the have-nots, you know, judge and criticize and try to put down the people that are doing it. But the reality is they're just mad because they can't, because if they could, they probably would do the exact same thing. Why? Because again, two sides of the same demoralized, degenerate, imbalanced, distorted coin. And I think these dynamics is more or less what sums up quite a lot of what we see within online dating, especially in the modern world, for many different reasons. I think one major thing is how the gender polarities are super reversed, and how all these societal dynamics are set up against people, so that most people are just dysfunctional at a hormonal level, at an endocrine level, at a psychological level, and chasing really things in the absolute wrong direction. And the things they're chasing that they think are going to deliver them to some promised land are actually the very things that are taking them away from the thing that they think they want, the things that are actually undermining their health. So they're more or less just enthusiastically participating in their own demise, is really what it comes down to. So again, to recap, on one hand, we have men that trend towards wimps and simps if they're weak. And then on the other extreme, we have kind of domineering, just taking advantage of women and, um, being a bit exploitative. And then for women, we have on one extreme trending towards just kind of childish selfishness and naivete, and just sort of a degree of self-absorption that's not particularly coming from a bad place. It's just kind of childish and kind of weak. And on the other extreme, we have narcissism. And I think like that one is like, I feel like I don't even need to explain, because we can just look at so many examples of social media influencers and OnlyFans that would easily validate that. Um, and then I think you can look at so many different examples of people that fit into those categories that are devoid of any sense of personal responsibility or accountability, but they demand status, power, respect. They demand results, they demand rewards, but shirk responsibility, shirk scrutiny, and shirk personal accountability, which that's not really how the world works. But that's what children do. And that's what really immature, weak men do as well. And I think that's kind of a really common social dynamic right now. So what happens is each of these four polarities all blame each other for their bad behavior and their poor decisions. You talk to the men and they blame women for all their stuff. You talk to the women and they blame men for all their things. When in reality, they're all there. When in reality, of course, societal dynamics are a thing. We're all subject to their influence. And we're also at a certain level we should be personally responsible and accountable for our decisions. So where the rubber hits the road on this, and what really kind of clarified it for me recently, is this dynamic that I'd seen so many times from so many women that I was either friends with, or I would see online, or I would come across or converse with in a dating context. So, really, the dynamic that ends up being created because of the four polarities that I just spent 10 minutes illustrating is what happens is a lot of women end up in this position where the guys they want don't want them, and or they treat them poorly, and the guys that do want them and would treat them well, they don't want. Why is that the case? Refer back to my earlier quadrant. On one extreme, we have guys that are just wimps and simps and just frothing at the mouth for attention from women, and, kind of just weak, demoralized, pretty ineffective guys that are pretty immature. Yet on the other extreme, we have, you know, more domineering, exploitative kinds of guys. So then what happens is women are left with these two choices most of the time. And then, of course, there's things in between. But pretty much once you start trending over here, it's like almost if you once you start doing cocaine every day or regularly, and then you try to go drink green tea. Green tea compared to cocaine is like not even a comparable buzz. But because you've hardwired your synapses to respond to cocaine, you meet all these normal guys throughout the rest of the spectrum that are maybe just great caffeine, great daily drinkers. You know what I mean? Caffeine, coffee, amazing beverages can do a lot for you as long as you're not like a meth coke addict. Like I've never done those aggressive drugs. So if I drink coffee, I'm like, yeah, feeling the coffee. I'm feeling it because I didn't screw my synapses by doing those other things. So what happens is the guys they want, i.e., the domineering kind of narcissistic guys that are a bit more exploitative, they don't want them. And then basically everyone else is now undesirable and they just don't. And how do I know this is true? Because they pretty much all say they don't feel the spark. They don't feel the chemistry. They want the lightning bolt. Use all these expletives and terminologies for basically the cocaine rush. So what I'm seeing over the last 10 years is millions and millions of women that have more or less wasted 20 years of their life, meaning their 20s and most of their 30s. And then they arrive at the end of their 30s and they have this oh shit moment of like, oh, and now I got to find a guy and like have a kid because um I top clock's ticking, right? Which is Totally fine and understandable. Like, no one's knocking at your free right as an individual. The problem is the self-defeating attitude. Because you've spent 20 years screwing up your chemistry and your wiring, and now you're at, you know, now it's a baseball game and you're in the bottom of the 8th inning and you're trying to come back from a 10-run deficit. It might be possible. Statistically speaking, though, it's not. It might be, but the odds are probably against you. So I just see that because I'm in my later 30s and I can't tell you how much this desperation and this anxiety and this panic is just subconsciously and sometimes even consciously hitting millions and millions and millions of modern, strong, independent women in this bracket. And now they're freaking out and they want to rope some guy into that anxiety and that panic, which, if this was coming from an actual genuine place, which again, sometimes it is. No one's saying, I'm talking about polarizing extremes. Of course, there are genuine people genuinely trying to find other genuine people for a genuine connection. Of course. But the fact of the matter is, if you're coming from this mindset of panic, anxiety, like already wired your neurology for being super coked out and stimulated and whatever, that's a self-defeating attitude. So basically all you're going to attract is probably undesirable things. And then because you end up frustrated because of all the decisions that maybe that person made as an adult, rather than take responsibility or accountability or be an adult about it, because of the polarities that I've talked about earlier, what happens is you blame society, you blame men, you blame the world, which of course there's some truth to, because society is society, economics are economics, for sure. But in reality, we're adults. And if we make a decision or a poor decision for 20 years or 15 years, ultimately, who's responsible for those 15, 20 years? I mean, it's kind of like saying, if I came on here and I said, look, I really love my life and I want to live to be 200 years old. And I said, that's my goal. But then I flew down to, I don't know, uh, somewhere off to the coast of Australia or somewhere off the coast of California where I know there's great white sharks. And before I jumped in the water, I cut myself 100 times, so I was pretty strongly bleeding. And then I jumped in the water where I knew great whites were, and I was bleeding, and I was just kind of like splashing around and doing the thing that kind of gets their attention. And I did those things. I took those actions. I made those decisions. And I also said I love my life and when I live and I want to live to be 200 years old. These are kind of contradictory things. So then if I get attacked by that shark, and maybe I lose a leg or maybe I die, whatever, and I want to sit there and be like, well, it's because the ocean is toxic and sharks are evil and we just need to like clean out the ocean and can get rid of sharks, and sharks shouldn't behave in this way and they're evil. And if we invent all these conspiracy theories and all these excuses for us engaging consciously and systematically over a long period of time in behaviors that are completely contradictory to us ever achieving the goal that we set out to. So in this example, I'm saying I want to live to be 200 years old and I love my life, but yet I'm like jumping in water where I know great white sharks are swimming and I'm cutting myself open so I'm bleeding out into the water and I'm splashing around. And maybe I don't know, wear like a black um, suit so I look like a seal or something. But I'm saying, no, 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 I want to live to be 200. I love my life. It's like, well, okay, you did all of these things. You made all of these decisions. You did these things over a period of time. And maybe you went out into that shark infested water every week for 15, 20 years. And maybe you didn't get attacked. And maybe eventually one day you did. and then you want to turn around and blame the shark and blame the ocean and blame the planet, blame Earth, blame God for creating Earth in this way, and for blame God for creating like sharks and for giving sharks teeth, and blame chemistry because teeth are made out of calcium and these other minerals, and evolution should have never done this and made shark teeth so big and strong and powerful, and sharks should be better, and make all these other crazy, insane, psychotic, ridiculous excuses to just skirt the fact that maybe for 20 years you engaged in contradictory behavior to the thing that you said you actually wanted to do and achieve. I think that's a great analogy or metaphor or image or simile or illustration or whatever of kind of the dynamic that we're getting at here, which can be applied for men and women in this dynamic. So again, to recap, why I think this ends up happening in very simple terms is that on one end of the extreme for men, they trend towards being wimps and simps, being kind of a loser, being directionless, aimless, purposelessness, playing lots of video games, jerking into porn, smoking weed, doing drugs, indulging their feelings. It's funny as I say that, like a bunch of people drop off, like indulging their feelings and really getting caught up in their emotions. And then on the other extreme, you have guys who maybe have some degree of power, wealth, status, good looks, whatever, and they can trend towards being a bit more domineering or exploitative. But in reality, they're both sharing the same demoralized, degenerate moral fabric, which causes them to behave in these dysfunctional ways, and kind of just comes down to some can and some can't. And then for women, on the flip side, they tend to trend towards childish selfishness, where it's not, again, it's not malicious, it's not malignant, it's not particularly coming from a bad place. It's just kind of what it is, childish selfishness that creates a high degree of being really self-absorbed. And on the flip side, you have the haves and the can-dos, so they tend to trend towards narcissism, because I just think OnlyFans and Instagram influencers and numerous other examples, and the fact that it's just normal for you to look to see a girl's phone and it's just all pictures of her, selfies of her, videos of her. It's like, if your sole focus in life is how you look and how you feel and what you want, am I describing an adult or am I describing a child? Because I can remember when I was a kid, all I cared about was what I wanted and how I felt. And that was the end all and be all of my reality. And if I didn't get what I wanted, I hate my parents, I hate the world, I hate my teachers. I didn't get what I want. I got what I wanted. Okay. Yay, now I'm happy. That was more or less the extent of of being a kid. And that's called being a kid. But if you're an adult and you behave in that way, I don't know if you could be surprised when the outcomes that arise from that are negative. And why I say that is because I can't tell you how many people I've talked to, both male and female, get into crappy relationships. And in reality, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier in a previous live stream. If they maybe just would have thought about it for like 5 minutes, maybe could have dodged a lifetime of pain and suffering and misery and discomfort and conflict. But instead, they were caught up in, I want what I want. I got to get what I want. I got to listen to my feelings, because that's all that's important, because my feelings and what I want is all I know, and that's all that's important. That's being a child. So if we're adults functioning in a somewhat kind of sort of adult world, and that's our mindset and that's our schema for dealing with people and relationships and life, I don't think we can be surprised. And that's for men and women. That's for everyone. I just Yeah, so like I said, each blame each other for their bad behavior and their poor decisions, when in reality, technically speaking, they are adults. So if they're making these decisions over a long period of time, ultimately they are responsible, I would think. And then that just again starts to create a situation where you have millions and millions of really lonely, desperate men throwing money and their attention at these OnlyFans girls, which OnlyFans is like a multi-billion-dollar company that is, I would say, almost exclusively female dominated and almost large in part supported by really lonely, weak, pretty desperate men. Because I think you have to be pretty lonely and desperate to engage in that sort of behavior, anyways. Or you just have or you just have so much money that you just don't give a shit. Of course, that's as well, but I'm saying in general. And then like cam girls and that whole industry, again, m- based on profiteering from weak, lonely, desperate men. A lot of video games, porn, drug culture, all of these things goes back to the same exact situation. Weak, lonely men, lacking purpose, lacking a lot of things. Um, or on the flip side, you have guys who maybe are just a bit more exploitative and can get away with it. And I can tell you a story. I mean, there's so many different examples I could give where I can tell you one straight up that illustrates this perfectly. And I've heard the same exact story from probably 15 different women where she doesn't want any of the guys that want her for many different reasons. And society's toxic and men are dumb and, all the whole list of gamut excuses. And then the guy she wants that she felt the spark with and the connection with and oh my God, we just had such an emotional thing. I just felt we really loved each other was just a guy who had so much money that he could just have a revolving door of very attractive women coming through his life that he could basically get everything he wanted from, but never had to exchange commitment or monogamy for. And that was it. So, on one hand, all these women can blame him for being, whatever exploitative. But at the same time, they're the ones enabling his bad behavior. Because if they had the moral fabric and the self respect enough, number one, they probably wouldn't be chasing someone like that to begin with, because usually why they're chasing it isn't because of genuine human to human connection. It's more so, oh, I want that life. I want that status. I want those symbols. But then they just keep supporting and validating and enabling his behavior, but then also being like, oh, he's not material. He's not going to commit and he won't commit to me. I'm like, yeah, but you just keep enabling and supporting it. But that's what you want. That's what you feel the spark with. And then this is where it gets funnier because now like therapy comes in like, oh, well, he just has childhood trauma issues and it's okay. Like he's just doing that because he has childhood trauma. And I'm like, really? So the 10 guys that you've been with that all have commitment issues because they can get as many women as they want at pretty much any time without really having to give them much. It's because they have childhood trauma and commitment issues. No, it's because they can do that and they can get away with it. So why would they want to do anything differently? They're getting everything they want without really any any expense or requirement on their part. So it's like you have to look at yourselves. You're the ones enabling the behavior. If you all just said no, we're not going to do this, then that person would starve and then maybe have to do something else. But the fact is that will never happen. So then I've heard that story so many times in so many different slight permutations. But then it's like, oh yeah, I was with this other guy, and he treated me really well. He did all these things. He was a great guy, but I just didn't feel the spark, I just didn't feel like he was the one. And it's like, well, what you're construing as this sensation you're gravitating towards perhaps isn't actually the thing that you think it is. Maybe the label you're applying to it is not the correct label. How would I guess this? Perhaps we can just look at the obvious outcomes that that is producing. And the fact that, you've been doing that for 15 to 20 years and it's been producing the same exact outcome, but you just keep persisting in it. Why do they keep persisting in it? Oh, you just got to be positive. Just got to be faith. You just got to have faith. You just got to believe. You got to just, work on yourself and do the work and, be your best self, and then everything will work out. And it's like, well, no, I don't, I don't think there's a reality in which that will ever actually occur. How do I believe that that is remotely accurate? There's millions of people in that exact scenario with that exact story saying more or less exactly the same things. So from those data points, you can more or less extrapolate certain functional dynamics, which is what I'm doing. And again, it's not to put anyone down, it's not to denigrate anyone or anything. It's more so the fact that it's sad. It's bothersome that millions of people are going to probably end up alone, or millions of people are going to end up dissatisfied and not really um uh yeah. It's kind of like a similar thing that I've thought about, where if I came on here and I said, you know what, I know my worth, I've done the work, capital T, capital W, and my therapist has told me that I'm an amazing, unique, amazing person, I'm a 10 out of 10, I deserve the best of everything, right? And that's what I believe about myself, and that's the standard, and I'm not gonna settle for anything less. And if he wanted to, he would. If they wanted to, they would. And if they can't meet my standard, then they can just hit the road. I know my worth. I know what I'm worth. I know what I'm capable of. I'm amazing. I'm a 10 out of 10. I've done the work, capital T, capital W. Let's say I said and thought and believed that as a guy, as a man. And then I was like, look, if she's not a supermodel worth at least $400 million, I'm just not even gonna waste my time. I know my worth. I'm in my late 30s. I don't have time to waste with these people who just aren't serious. I think pretty much everyone would look at me and say, "Bro, you are fucking delusional." Like, if you think you are only gonna get a woman of that caliber and that's all you deserve and all you're gonna settle for, like, you're not Tom Brady. I think you're fucking insane. And fortunately, I have friends in my life who, if I said all of that to, they would probably be like, no. Fortunately, I have family members who, if I said that to, they'd probably be like, yeah, I don't know about that. Whereas on the flip side, I think a lot of people have people in their lives that don't do that, that just support their lies and support their insanity. How do I say that is true? Look at the millions and millions of just dissatisfied, single, alone, mostly a lot of women and men. Look at TikTok, look at social media, look at the stats and the demographics for dating apps and for therapy and all these things. And it's pretty suggestive. I'm not saying it's completely conclusive or it's 100% true or 100% of the time, but it's enough of a dynamic to have enough of an impact to be meaningful and to be worth maybe discussing, and more importantly, worth trying to actually do something differently, so that maybe we can produce different results, so that maybe we can not fall into those traps and maybe not end up with the negative outcomes and the negative consequences. I think that's actually the point. But I think we live in a world now where that's all out the window. Um, that's all gone. people can be anything at any time, at any place, regardless of what bearing actual reality has. It's like I could come on and identify as a 6'7". I don't know. I need to figure out how tall is Bill Russell. I should come on and identify as Bill Russell as like a 13-time NBA world champion and like who knows how many MVPs and like probably one of the greatest basketball players, definitely of his time. If I came on and identified as having all of those accolades, but I had everyone in my life be like, "Yes, queen, you're amazing. Know your worth. If he wanted to, he would. You've done the work, capital T, capital W." Like I wouldn't be surprised if life created negative outcomes from those attitudes. Just like the example I gave earlier. If I said, "Hey guys, my goal in life is to live to be 200 years old because I love my life. I want to just enjoy it as much as possible." But then every week I went out swimming where I knew great white sharks were, and I cut myself open every time before I went in the water. And I just went and jumped and swam in that water and made as much splashing noise as possible. But I did that every week. But I also said, "Hey, I love my life. I want to live to be 200 years old." And then let's say I got attacked by a shark and mangled. And then I came out of the water and said, "Man, sharks are toxic. I can't believe the world is this way. The ocean is evil. We need to get rid of the ocean and get rid of sharks. And chemistry is bad because, it created these elements that came together that formed sharks' teeth to be so sharp and so strong and created the chemical composition to give the ligamental and tendinal strength to sharks' jaws that allowed them to just rip everything apart." And all this insane justification for the fact that maybe for a long period of time I just made really bad decisions. But because I'm functioning, whether I'm a guy or I'm a girl, really they all share this same degenerated, demoralized core of functioning more or less like a child. Meaning, I want what I want. All I know is my feelings and what I want. And that's all that's important. If I don't get what I want, I'm mad. So I blame the world and I blame people. I blame women. I blame men. I blame all these dynamics. 'Cause I didn't get what I want. And I'm upset. I didn't get what I wanted. Why can't the world just give me what I want? Okay, well, I'll just go on social media. Oh, I'll just buy this. I'll click this. I like this. Oh, 5 people like my photos. Okay, maybe I am like worth something. Maybe I am meaningful. Oh my God, I opened my dating app and like 20 guys liked me. Ew, they're so disgusting. Let's look at their, oh, they say I'm pretty. Oh, hey, you're pretty. Oh, hey, you're beautiful. Ew, they're so disgusting. But also, I kind of feel good now because these people that I think are fucking disgusting, that are losers, that I don't respect, that I don't like, that I'm not going to actually really date or give any attention to, they gave me attention, so maybe I am something good. Oh, but now I didn't get what I want. Oh, society's bad, society's evil, society's toxic. It's the patriarchy. It's it's all these conspiracy theories working against me, and that's why the things are the way they are. Like this is the world people are living in, guys. Um, and my point is that whether you're a guy or a girl, you're, a wimp or a simp or some kind of childishly selfish person, the mechanics are more or less the same. So how does this relate to sex? Because there's three pieces to what I was going to talk about. The first was just modern online dating, and I think I kind of hit that enough. The second dynamic is actually looking at what underlies and goes into sex that is motivating and pushing people into these things. And by people, I mean literally all of us, if we are alive. And then thirdly, there's a whole piece about spirituality that we'll get into, which actually I'll just say this now. The reality is that before we can ever hope to pursue anything higher or spiritual or whatever word you want to use, the stage everyone skips and no one talks about and no one does is the stage of actually becoming human. That's where we're at, guys. Like, if I meet someone and they have like blinding white light coming out of them, or they can emit fire, or they're levitating, or they have insanely high level, unbelievable abilities, then I'll say, oh yeah, you are spiritual. You have a spiritual practice because you've actually contacted and merged with that capacity of human, not human, but just that capacity of existence. The rest of us are not that, so we're not that. So then that word doesn't apply to what we're doing, myself included. We're at the level of, fuck, let's try to actually become human, which is to say, actually exist in a very competent, efficient, and effective, strong manner in the world as a human, which is what we are. And it's funny because I can just imagine all the kind of disassociated, disembodied people like, no, I'm not my body. We're more than this. We're bigger than that. I'm not this. It's not that. No, spirit is this, spirit's that, soul is this, soul is that. I'm just like, really look in the mirror. Oh, but you can't believe the physical world and the world is empty. And no, that's not what they're referring to. The physical world's pretty real. It's pretty dense. It's pretty predictable. It's a real thing. If I take this cup and I drop it, I guarantee you that the liquid contents will spill all over me. As much as I believe I'm not this body, I'm bigger, I'm this, I'm that, the world is empty, it's all consciousness, any other manner of permutation or deviation, every single time I drop this cup, I will get soaked with whatever's inside of it. Oh, but you're harsh, you're negative, you're a materialist, you're a nihilist, you're fill in the blank. No, I'm just using my brain. Because there are bigger, more complicated problems in the world, yes. This isn't one of them. But if I don't have the capacity to deal with this basic level of life efficiently and effectively in a strong manner, then everything else beyond that is pretty much forget it. It's not that door won't open. And that's not necessarily my opinion. That just seems to be something that seems to have been mentioned by every tradition, every text, every legitimate teacher forever. It's kind of like in there. And it's almost as if it's almost like there could have been a reason. I mean, I don't know, right? It's like they said it, they wrote it down, it was there, it's codified, it's been the same for a really long period of time across so many different geographical locations and physical locations and eons and ages. I wonder if there's something to that. No. There's not anything to that because I'm a modern person and I know more than them. So this lowest, most base primal aspect of myself, which is the only thing that I can contact, no, that's the highest, most transcendental thing. My point is, in my kind of pseudo sarcastic dickhead way of explaining it, is we live in an age now where the lowest, most primal reactive aspects of our nature are what people are glorifying and saying, like, no, this is higher, this is spiritual, this is amazing. Which is basically all of your fight or flight response and your lower like survival mechanisms, which is what people are stimulating and accessing the vast majority of the time. And then they're labeling those subtle, weird sensations or visual stimulation as like, oh my God, it must be what the ancients were referring to. No, it literally just is what it is. So now let's go back to what I was saying earlier about sex. So to set the context, sex in the absence of genuine love becomes more about fear, power, and control. Obviously, there's a whole spectrum of experience of sex that is actually based on love and based on connection and based on this larger force that exists between two people. Of course, I think that would be the ideal. That would be the thing that maybe people would want to strive for, or maybe at a certain point was a bit more normal, but maybe it isn't now. But maybe that's what certain traditions and religions were trying to point towards. Like maybe this is what you should be trying to do. But anything beyond that is more so what we'll get into, which comes down to fear, power, and control. Whether, you're a girl, swiping Tinder and doing dating apps and whatever, or you're a guy just beating it to porn all the time. Fear, power, control. And this is especially important as it relates to modern online dating, as I've just been discussing it. So then you could see how that might be a bit problematic, and that might be a bit of an obstacle to, I don't know, trying to do anything beyond that, which is maybe why, I don't know, just a guess, just my subjective opinion, just my truth. Maybe it's why all these traditions and religions were perhaps recommending that people either not do it or learn to regulate it or harmonize it. I don't know. I'm crazy, I guess, right? I mean, I'm just a crazy person. Uh, because whether we want to admit it or not, fear is really what drives the vast majority of our sex drive most of the time. Fear of what? Fear of death, fear of lack of survival, more so fear of the loss of identity is really what it comes down to. Which, as an example of that, look at how resistant most of us are most of the time to any degree of change because the loss of identity. Even if the change we want to make might be really positive, somehow it's really scary and we don't want to do it and we avoid it. Why? Because the loss of identity. And even I think that is actually a greater fear than the fear of death. And that's kind of what I've been taught. I can't really speak to it from a deep degree of personal experience or direct knowledge, but the way it's been taught and explained to me and seemingly to be corroborated across a lot of different texts and traditions is that really that's our biggest fear, is that loss of identity, and that's what's actually the fear of death. Because there are people that experience death and it's like a blissful, amazing experience. They merge back into white light and all of their loved ones are there, and it's like just this enveloping infinite sense of love and connection and warmth and all of these things. There are people when they do sort of die, that's what they tend to experience and report. And that seems to be to across all time and space. Um, so the more fear someone has in their system means the more stimulated their fight or flight response is, the more of a higher buzzing frequency their nervous system is at, which means the more heavily oriented towards sex they will be. Thus, the higher sex drive they'll have. Why? Because they have more fear in their system. Fear of, I'm going to die. My genetics aren't going to go on. I got to reproduce. I got to create another me. I got to do all these things. So that's where a lot of that sex drive is coming from. And this overemphasis on survival tends to lead to burnout, tends to lead to infertility, and tends to lead to the need for more and more stimulation, which is like kinks and perversion and weird porn and fetishes and all of these things that people get into. Why? Because it's just like doing cocaine or doing any drug. You start off with a little bit, and then a little bit doesn't really give you the effects. You got to do more, you got to do more, you got to do more. So you think you're chasing this higher high, but you're actually just getting more depleted. And everything at a certain point, everything below a certain level of threshold is basically nothing to you. So people are doing the same thing sexually. But now we live in a time where that's all encouraged, that's all supported, that's all like rewarded is the word I'm looking for. And I can't tell you how many ladies I met over the last or talked to or came across in the last, especially 5-6 years, to where it's like the aggression and the degree of stimulation and like the emphasis toward kinks and weird porn and fetishes and aggressive stimulation just is so much higher. Why? Basically for what I'm saying. But then on the same token, their ability to feel and be sensitive is is like proportionally diminished. So in order to feel anything, they literally need more. Like I can tell you, uh, I can't tell you how many of them that I met, and I had a few literally proposition me for sex, like openly just say, "Hey, do you want to go do this? Do you want to come over and do this? Do you want to do this after dinner?" Just straight up open direct invitation. And I'm thinking, "No, absolutely not." Like because what they had described and what they had to do to even feel anything is they needed some combination of porn and some combination of like a massively aggressive vibrator, like one of these vibrators that are like industrial size. It's like this. It's like the size of my arm, and it's like I mean I've never seen one in person. They just told me that that's what they had and that's what they needed to like feel anything. So they needed porn. They needed this massive industrial size vibrator, and they wanted to invite me into that. Like, oh yeah, I just really need to meet a guy and like get laid. I'm like, that's one of the most sad things I've heard, and I've heard a lot of sad things. I've and it's like but then it showed me that's the level, and then these were also the same people that like, "Oh, yeah, I like BDSM, I like gangbangs, I like violence," and I'm just thinking like, I think this all kinda goes together, and this was not a rare occurrence, right? So my point is it really started to illustrate the fact that the more fear someone has in their system, the more these things start to occur. And the more degree for stimulation and kinks and perversion that tends to occur, and then infertility, in not no sensitivity, all that stuff starts to go down, and consequently, their emotions just get whacked. Tons of anxiety, tons of depression, big swings, so that now you need, um, you know, psychological medication or whatever. And the funny thing is not all these people that I'm speaking about were even on social media. They weren't even clued into that. So it wasn't that not always the same thing. Like, and that's sometimes why it was surprising is because otherwise they were pretty normal and cool and chill as people. They didn't fit like a particular mold of what you would imagine. It was a lot of different kinds of females from a lot of different backgrounds. Some, you know, really successful, really high paying jobs and like quite intelligent and cool in other manners. And then just even other demographics. So it was quite interesting. But basically, it creates a dynamic where the more you need, the more you do, the more you need, the more you eat, the hungrier you get. And again, just for clarity of context, the same thing is true for guys with their porn obsession and their weird sex obsession. Same dynamics. The emptier you get, the more emptiness you crave. The more emptiness you get, the more emptiness you crave, the more emptiness you end up experiencing. Because misery loves company, the emptiness just spreads and grows. And the other facet to this is power and control, which I think is kind of a little easier to see than the fear piece. Because on one extreme, a lot of women use it as like a negotiation or power play tactic in the relationship, which is kind of, and I'm not saying it's a good or bad or right or wrong thing. I think there's a lot of value because that's kind of a little more of the traditional thing where it's like wait a while to have sex, which is smart because then you can actually get to know each other. You can actually build comfort, build rapport, build a relationship, connect as humans, and like establish things that will serve you in the long run, or at least give you the the time to decide if you're even compatible or you even are going to work over a period of time before you jump into like the heavy hitting chemicals and hormones that'll basically just shut off the whole your whole frontal cortex and put you into the fuck fog to where you're just like, oh yeah, this is great, yeah, this person's awesome. In reality, maybe they're not, but now your frontal cortex is just turned off, and now you won't know until it's too late. um So that's one part of it. And then, of course, for men, we can see that they tend to trend towards feelings of power, feelings of control, feelings of dominance over women because they gain some sense of power from, bagging and tagging as many women as they possibly can. And in some ways, there's a naturalness to those dynamics in terms of a certain degree of of power and control and a certain degree of, not. Um, and I think you can also, on the extremes, look at things like BDSM and the massive increase of that, and almost the degree in which it was normalized through something like 50 Shades of Grey, which I think was at one time was like the highest grossing book series of all time. Like it was insanely popular. The movies were awful and terrible. I couldn't even sit through. I think I watched the first one just as a joke, and I was like, "This is fucking horrible, so poorly done." Um, and I didn't even watch the other ones. But the fact that is that millions and millions. I think this is something to really take note of. While 50 Shades of Grey was the most popular book thing at the time, was also when Donald Trump was president, like around 2016, when the women's all these marches were going, because Trump said, if you're powerful enough as a man, you can basically do whatever you want to women and it's fine. It's basically what he said. He said it in a different words, but that was the general idea. And then you have this book series about a man that's powerful enough that basically does whatever he wants to women, i.e., BDSM, and they're pretty much okay with it. They're on board with it. So, how can we make sense of the fact that both of these things are existing at the same time? We think men are horrible and they're disgusting, power hungry, dominating creatures. Yet at the same time, we're buying all of these books about a rich, successful, powerful man who does whatever he wants to women. And we're validating and supporting it by buying it and reading it and making it the most popular thing. That's a societal dynamic, almost like what I was saying over about the sharks. I want to live to be 200 years old because I love my life, but every week I go swim with where I know great white sharks are, and I cut myself so I'm bleeding into the water. Still my matchup. So I think you can see the great rise in BDSM and things of that nature to really understand the influence of power and control and as it relates to sexuality, and the fact that over time, all of these things have just gotten more aggressive, more hyperstimulated, more ramped up. Why? Because people in general are more fearful, they're crazier, they're more mentally unstable, and they're more ramped up all the time, which got exponentially worse over the last 3 years with the pandemic. And this this is all the opposite of being able to actually connect with other human beings in a meaningful, successful, productive way, which is probably why dating apps are massively popular and why people are generally more depressed, more anxious, on more pharmaceutical drugs, on more recreational drugs, have more debt, and are less happy with their life across the board overall. So these are not particularly inspiring social dynamics, but they are dynamics nonetheless. And I think if we want to succeed in the world, it would be useful and helpful to maybe understand them and try to navigate in a more effective and intelligent manner. And people were like, "Oh, how do I do that?" Well, I think that's pretty much everything I talk about in every video that I make and every video that I have made for the last like year and a half is how to actually do that. Because in a world that is falling apart and degrading and people are losing their mental stability, what's the solution? Build mental stability, develop a solid fabric, be able to use the front of your brain, be able to navigate the world like a human, like an adult, which is basically all the things that I talk about in every video over the last year and a half. But how I know people don't care and it's not popular and it's not interesting is because um, I can tell the views are really low. And I can already anticipate, and I will laugh when I get grumpy comments. Oh, your your thumbnail was clickbait. I'm just like, it's it's clickbait. It doesn't have anything to do with what you're talking about. Or it has absolutely everything to do with what I'm talking about, and it perfectly illustrates and encapsulates everything that I'm talking about. Because if you look at the picture, it's a pretty clear example. It's two people having sex, and the girl's looking at her phone. That's kind of a perfect illustration example of everything that I'm talking about here. Just like a couple of weeks ago, I had someone respond to one of my company emails being like, cut out with the clickbait BS. If you want to have a successful business, drop the clickbait. Because I had an email about like changing habits and doing certain things, and I said most people won't do this. Well, the reality is most people won't. So what I said isn't clickbait. It's just actually accurate and true relative to the context that I was speaking about, because most people won't make the changes that I spoke about, because that's just how people operate most of the time. All of us, because of the inherent loss of identity and fear of change that we, for whatever reason, we all have. So that is the totality of what I wanted to cover and go over within this live stream. And to be totally honest with you, I have not looked at the chat at all, but it looks like there's some activity. It looks like there's some people kind of arguing or going back and forth with each other, um, which I haven't read at all. So I need to go back and look at the thing. Can you please weigh in your opinion on age gaps? I don't really see any problem in it. Uh, I think if two people are genuinely interested in connecting with each other in a genuine way, I don't really have any issue with any particular age gap. Um, so again, I think it just depends on the people. But yeah, let's see. Do you think there's a problem with dating someone a lot longer if you're in your 30s with a 20-year-old? I mean, I don't see the problem if you're both two legal consenting adults that genuinely respect each other, then all good. Go for it. Uh, sorry, I'm just reading and scrolling. Uh, okay, I think I'm caught up. I agree with you, but to play devil's advocate, what do you think about people who say legal doesn't mean ethical? I mean, I think there's a lot of hypothetical what if situations we could sit around and evaluate. But I don't personally find myself in that situation. So I don't see the point in throwing that football around. If you're engaged in that behavior and you want to engage in it, then you don't need me to give you permission or approval to do it. If it works for you and you want to do it and everyone's happy and no one's getting hurt, then cool. Because I've met a lot of people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s that still behave like fucking children. Um, so yeah, maybe they're older, but that doesn't necessarily. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've dealt with people with adults that behave like children over the silliest things. So, of course, yeah, age can mean a lot of different things, but also there's also still a lot of really immature older people. So, I think it's just again, I'm not I'm not a dating coach. I'm not a relationship coach. Uh, I'm not a marriage and family attorney. So I don't really think about that. Um, what's the youngest age I would date if I was single? Uh, I think it would depend. At least for me, I'm 39, so I feel like for me personally, 30 is kind of about the cutoff for me, just because of growing up in different worlds can cause a lot of problems. You start getting into certain demographics, certain differences, then there can be challenges in terms of even being able to relate to each other, even being able to. But at the same time, it really just depends. If people genuinely love each other and genuinely have a connection that's built on genuine respect and genuine love, then cool. If it's some transactional whatever, whatever, then okay, that's a different thing. So that's pretty much it. Um, What do you think about two people considering a relationship, but one is anti-vax COVID brainwashing and the other is pro-vax? How can two people with such vastly differing worldviews be compatible? Um, I mean, I think it just really depends on how dogmatic and emotional those people are about those particular issues. That's pretty much what it comes down to. Um, because I've done both. I mean, the fact of the matter is, most people you encounter will probably be on that brainwashing bandwagon, as you called it. So, yeah, it's a tough personal decision that a person would have to make. And I think, if it's someone you're going to try to have kids with and build a life with, that could cause problems down the line because maybe you're going to have different philosophical views about the choices and the life you want to create for your children. So that kind of comes down to a compatibility factor at a certain point. And yeah, but I mean, the fact of the matter is, most people are going to be on board with whatever the p- the popular ideology is at that moment. So it's just part of. Yeah. Again, it's a bell curve. Most people are going to be in the middle of the bell curve. That's just how we seem to organize as humans. And if you're going to be outside of the bell curve on either end, then what's around you is going to be smaller. It's funny looking at the comments. People are, it seems like James refers to the anti-vax. Wait, oh yeah, James. Funny that you refer to the anti-vaxxer as the brainwashed one. Uh, it's, at least for me, this is the entertaining thing about these particular kinds of issues is that you really get to see where people are and what their mindset is. Um, sorry, I'm just trying to peel the label off this lighter while I'm talking. Which this lighter is absolute garbage, but it's all they had, and I needed to light incense, and I ran out. So, but anyways, that's all I had for the live stream in terms of what I outlined. And If there are any questions related to what I was actually talking about, then I'll be happy to answer those, but I'll otherwise have to leave soon if there are no other questions related to what I actually said and talked about. Which, to be completely transparent, I think the most important piece about this is the general overall dynamic is, on one end, men tend to trend towards wimps and simps if they're weak. And then if they have some degree of strength or power, they tend to trend towards domineering or a bit exploitative. Whereas women on one end tend to trend towards kind of childish selfishness and self-absorption. And then on the other extreme, trend pretty heavily towards narcissism. So then that creates this environment of these kinds of extremes trying to relate to each other, which then they all blame each other for their bad behavior and their poor decisions. None of them look at their own. Actually, I take that back. Through the therapy world and through doing the work, people do think they are actually doing the work or working on themselves. But I think the vast majority of the time, they're just making themselves worse. Of course, there are exceptions. Of course, there are people that engage in therapies that are extremely practical and pragmatic and allow them to genuinely take responsibility and reflect. And the key here that it makes it functional is the ability to function more like an adult and use your brain and take personal responsibility and accountability for your actions and your behaviors. I think that's the missing piece. Versus if you're just putting labels on it or blaming society or blaming anyone on these different spectrums or blaming your trauma or blaming this, blaming that, you're more or less just stuck in a dysfunctional, immature sort of way where you're like, oh, I didn't get what I want, I'm mad. And that's more or less it. I think the big key there is actual accountability, responsibility. And part of that is also problematic because so many of the authorities in the space are themselves quite terrible. They have a degree, but usually it's a degree in ideology. And I just say this because numerous people that I've come across, both men and women, are still profoundly emotionally fragile, still existing in a highly dysfunctional, dysregulated, ineffective state, but tell themselves that the opposite is true because they've done the work, capital T, capital W, and they know their worth. But in actuality, what they've done is just build a house of cards and just keep adding on layers of these are my boundaries, these are my expectations, this is what I won't tolerate, this is it's like all this stuff. And it's like, cool, that's a step in the right direction, but it's still just carrying all of the past negativity and just recreating it. And you're judging all of the people you meet through that past thing. So it's inherently a self-defeating, ineffective thing. Why do I say that? I say that because when I look at people who behave in that way, the results they produce are not successful. So then I say, oh, that's not successful. That's self-defeating. What do they say? That I'm mean, I'm a jerk, I'm an asshole, I'm negative, I'm cynical, I need to be positive. They say all these things. And I'm like, okay, cool. I would say different things if the results that you were producing were different. Because optimism is great so long as it is actually based in reality. So yeah. So that's the meat and the point of the live stream. And again, is equally putting blame across both genders equally because I think they share the same demoralized, sort of weak foundations. And they both blame each other. And it's just kind of this self-defeating, dysfunctional ball rolling downhill that seems to only get more and more momentum over time. And social media and in a lot of the therapy industry are just supporting it and making it worse. Um, so yeah, that's that. What are steps people can take to get out of popular ideologies that don't serve them? I think pretty much every video that I make and have made over the last 8 years is oriented towards that endeavor. That's my goal, that's my intention, that's my focus, that's my aim, that's why I create the things that I create. So I think, yeah, I think that's yeah, all the videos pretty much would be oriented towards that. Let's see. So the last thing I'll say about things as relating to understanding what's going on in the world and also like dating apps in general. Basically, a deciding factor that I've noticed is if you look at a person and then you ask how many variables can they take into account at any given time? How many how many perspectives and points of view can they take into account at a given period of time? And what's the width, the depth, and the breadth of those data points and of those reference points and of those points of views can they take in? On one extreme, if it's very small and very limited to where all they know and all they can take in is what's on the news and that's it, period, end of story, done. That's the truth. That's the reality. That's completely it, done, end of story. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes that's not. That's a very limited data set. That's a very limited, very limited reference points. It's a very limited, just one point of view. Whereas you have another person that can maybe take in 5 points of views, maybe 25 different data points, different reference points, and then be able to form an opinion or a view of a subject based on that, then I think that's the difference in the deciding factor within a person that will then determine where they might land on a particular subject or where um, how they might react to a certain thing. And I've I have a Facebook post that I did where I worded that in a much better way, but I don't know how to find it. Oh, here we go. I think I can found it. I find it now. Um, just give me a second because I want to. Okay, here we go. Okay, I'm still looking. I'm just trying to sort through. Ah, here we go. So at a certain point, it just becomes a question of at what scale does a person evaluate and analyze something And then how many variables and data points do they include in that? The vast majority of the time, the vast majority of people solely focus on their subjective emotional gratification in that moment. And the only data points they consider are exclusively what the news or media tells them, which is why things are the way they are right now. So if you are someone that can evaluate a subject or a topic or a dynamic or a thing from a much wider scale, and then you can include many different variables and data points in that larger scale, then obviously by default, your opinion, your perspective is going to be very foreign and very unwelcome and very uninteresting or borderline offensive to the person who solely focuses on their immediate emotional gratification, and that's it. And I say the vast majority of people, the vast majority of the time, only focus on that instantaneous emotional gratification. How would you like examples of that? Just look at how most people manage their money, and at least in America, how many people are drowning in debt. Look at our consumerist culture, which is based on what? Instant gratification, and the inability to realize how this decision now will play out and interface with all these other variables in my life over a period of history. And I think, personally speaking, this is why a lot of what I discuss just as a person is generally foreign and unwelcome and uninteresting to a lot of people, is because it's not immediately speaking to subjective emotional gratification. It's looking at a lot of different variables across a lot of different contexts, across a wide set of data points over maybe a wider context of impact, maybe on the personal individual. Here's how it affects people individually. And then here as a group, maybe here's how it affects people. And then as a best guess, based on how it affects individuals and how that shows up in groups, and over a period of observing things over time, making some kind of informed guess about that based on all of these things. That is called, at least to me, just some small modicum of intelligence. Now, for a lot of people, that's offensive, that's rude, that's mean, it's hostile, it's all these different things. It means you're a know-it-all, or you're arrogant, or you're better than them. Fill in the blank. Which, at least for me, what I realize is that the common denominator behind all of the words and the expletives and the adjectives they use is sort of this, meaning something I said or did, or the perspective or opinion made them feel less than. So then they have to express that through trying to attack me or imply that I somehow think I'm above than, when in actuality, I probably think I'm below, which is why I'm trying to understand and figure things out, because I think I'm an idiot, or I think I don't actually understand, or I think I have a problem, or I'm struggling with something. So I want to then try to investigate or figure out, or develop some degree of competency or understanding that I think is positive. The only reason I do that because I think I'm lacking. So, but I just say that because so many people, men and women, just have these emotional breakdowns at the most basic things you wouldn't really even think they would. But it comes down to subjective emotional gratification in that moment. I can give you an example. There was a guy that I was friends with many, 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 many years ago. It's probably well over 10 years at this point. This was a man. This was an adult male who, viewed himself as a bit of a Casanova, a bit of a ladies' man. So, pretty competent, strong, effective man, you would think, or in his mind, or whatever. The person was also like kind of a dickhead, and had repeatedly over time been unreliable in their word. Said they would do something and they didn't do it. Said they would show up and they didn't. And then multiple times were talking negatively about me behind my back, to which I had receipts. Someone said, "Oh, like, here's a screenshot of this person speaking poorly behind your back." And I confronted them and I said, "Hey, you said these things about me, and I'm not on board with that. Oh my God, no, dude, I would never do that. Like that's just fake, and this person's a liar, and like, oh, this crazy nonsense. So I'm like, okay, dude, like we're just not gonna be friends anymore. We're done. Don't contact me again. Okay. So then some period of time later, person starts texting me again. Oh my God, I'm doing this internal training and I'm so cool, and I'm trying to say something that I think you like and agree with so that you'll maybe like somehow want to be my friend again. So I'm trying to just appeal to what I believe is to be your bias. And I'm just like, look, dude, I see it for what it is. I'm not interested. Like, appreciate you reaching out. But because of X, Y, and Z that occurred in the past, I'm, I don't really believe you to be a very upstanding person that I want to be friends with or have in my life because of the things that you did. And then literally the next thing they said is, "Oh, fuck you. You think you're so much better than everyone else. I'm coming for you. I'm going to attack you. I'm going to destroy your life. I'm going to do all these things to you." And I'm just like, this, this behavior, this action is exactly why I just said what I just said. So I say what I say, and then the person exhibits the exact behavior of the exact dynamics that I just described, which was my reasoning and rationale and the motivating factor of me making that choice and that decision. But they're doing exactly the thing as a way of disproving and invalidating what I just said, when in actuality, it just completely supports it. But in their mind, it's the opposite. So that's an adult man. And there's also dozens of adult men that have written me emails like, I'm gonna fucking kill you. I'm gonna find out where you live and I'm gonna come for you, you fucking hipster piece of shit. Or any permutation of just insane attacks. Why? Because there was a video I can remember in particular. I said, yeah, visualization has really no role in Qigong. And it has nothing to do with it because it's literally just your imagination. And your imagination, by definition, is imaginary. Being imaginary means it's not real. Sure, it might create some subtle sensation on your nervous system because it's literally your brain and it's literally your nervous system. And they've just railed and done all these things, right? And these are adult men. And then I can tell you another story for an adult female. One of them I was on a first date with because we were chatting and, she was like a body worker and it seemed cool, right? And it was just kind of like, oh, yeah, let's just meet up. It's, it's whatever. The weather's good and we'll just meet up and see what it is. She literally almost started crying because I was like, yeah, most Qigong that people are doing is like kind of fake. What do you mean? And I'm just like, oh, never mind. Literally just started crying, almost on the verge of tears because of stating something that's just explicitly true and obvious in a conversation under the presumption of someone who said that they, wanted to be good at this thing and were actually pretty good at body work and whatnot. And then there was another girl that I was talking to who genuinely started crying and like had a breakdown because I said that human design was founded by a coke addict that had a psychotic breakdown in Ibiza, which is literally historically true. How do I know that's true? One of my mentors or people I studied with or was a teacher was like studied with the founder and just told me straight up, this is what went down. He didn't say it exactly in those words, but I was like, oh yeah, the dude was just doing a lot of coke and fucking partying and had a massive psychological break and then came up with this shit and then spent the rest of his life speaking in complete gobbledygook that people just gobble up. Because when I went to listen to the guy's lectures, I'm like, this guy's just just out. And these are adults that have, oh, just stop. Just stop. It's just slot. What? That's not a lot. That's That's barely anything. So what I mean is, my point is, if you say pretty much anything true about anything these days, there's just a percentage of people, adults, male and females, who are going to react in this hyper emotional way. Why are they going to react in this hyper emotional way? Because their preferred method of relating to the world is just their subjective, temporary emotional experience of what they want. And that's the extent of the amount of variables and data points that they consider. And that is the breadth, the width, and the depth of, and the scale of data points they are taking into account. That's just the best way that I can understand it and describe it. And this is why, and again, why do I say that? There's going to be the people who are going to be like, because you're a jerk and you're mean and you're whatever, fill in the blank. Or it's being on YouTube for 13 years and encountering thousands of people across so many different backgrounds, teaching classes, traveling the world, going to workshops, going to classes, being in relationships with people, a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts. And then out of that, observing certain things and then trying to make sense of those certain things and then sharing exactly what that sense is right now as best as I can, as clear as I can, which of course is always just doing the best that I can and is never, of course, 100% true 100% of the time. Definitely not. But all we can do is the best we can do and try to come up with something that's at least functional and useful enough to be accurate, to actually serve us and make us more effective, efficient, and effective in our lives. That's pretty much the best you can do. But you just encounter so much. You encounter so many individuals whose sole response to something is to try and invalidate it because it is your truth, or because they invent a hypothetical scenario completely unrelated to the one that's actually real in the world. And in that imagined hypothetical scenario, their misunderstanding of what you said isn't true. So therefore, what you said is not true. That's called deflection. And that's called just trying to pivot away. And this is what a lot of people do, men and women. It's like if a conversation thread is this, they're like, well, what about let's take it over here? Let's take it over there. Let's take it over here. Let's take it over there. And they'll try to do absolutely anything and everything to take it in any other direction other than what's actually useful and meaningful. Whether that's personal attacks, emotional attacks, weird therapy things, really whatever it is. But then on the flip side is that multiple things can be true at the same time. The question becomes, under what context, under what conditions, and then what data points and reference points is that person speaking about that then make that thing true? Because multiple things can be true at the same time, which is why there is some validity to your truth. Again, it just depends on the scale and the width and the breadth and the depth at which someone is speaking about something, and what reference points and data points they're using to support whatever it is that they're saying, which is, again, the same thing that I've been talking about in videos for the last year and a half about listening. Meaning when someone says something, rather than just being like, my subjective emotional experience in this moment is this, so it's true or false, done, period, end of story, closed, move on with my life. Okay, cool. What about considering, well, what's the context, what's the scope, what's the overall situation they're speaking about and within, and then what data points and reference points are they including in that are supporting and making that thing be true for them? When you can actually understand those things, then you actually understand what that person's saying. And then you can actually get a little bit closer to understanding who they are as a person. And I can give you a personal example of this, where there was a girl that I was dating, and One time she was like, "Oh, you're not listening." So I said, "No, I'm listening." "No, you're just not listening. You're not listening to me." And I was like, "Would you like for me to repeat what you've said?" "Yes, you should." So I verbatim in chronological order said everything that they had just been saying and talking about over the last 5 or 10 minutes. Eventually, they were just like, "Okay, stop, shut up. Okay, whatever. Okay, yeah, done, whatever." And then just try to move on with the situation. Not admit they were wrong, not apologize for being a dick, not adjust or adapt their perception of like, "Okay, well, maybe he really does listen," or anything. Oh, it's just, "Okay, whatever. I don't care. Shut up. Leave me alone. Shut up." Ugh. And then this was also a similar person who would say, "Oh, you just don't understand me. You're just not hearing me." And I would say, "Okay, well, can I say what I think you're saying and why I think you're saying it and how you feel, and then you can tell me if that's right or wrong." And then, of course, for the first 2 times, they were like, "Yes." And then I would do pretty much exactly that. "You said this because you felt this way, because you had these experiences, and from those experiences, you made these assumptions about yourself, about whatever the situation was, because you had these feelings. And because of that, now you're doing this." And then verbatim explaining the context, the data points, and the reference points, and even the emotional qualities for what it is that they were doing in that moment. Because in my mind, that is called understanding where someone is coming from. Or, in other words, empathy. So if you don't understand where someone's coming from, then yeah, you can have some emotional empathy for sure. Like they're in pain, so you can feel their pain. Yes, there's that basic human thing. But at a certain point in a larger context, if you don't actually understand what's going on, your ability to solve the problem or do effective action is also limited. So, at least in my mind, actually understanding where someone is coming from is pretty important. And I can't tell you the amount of experiences I've had that are basically exactly that. So within this example, the person was like, "Oh yeah, you're not hearing me, you're not listening." So after I repeated everything, I said, "Well, I guess our definitions of listening are different, because my definition of listening is that I can accurately repeat and say in many different ways what it is you're saying it, why you arrived at that, and how you actually feel, versus your version of listening is you can't repeat anything that I said. You don't actually understand or hear anything of what I'm actually getting across. And you don't know why I say that or how I got there at all." So I guess our definitions of listening and understanding are very different. So then, to their definition, yes, I wasn't listening. To my definition, I was listening. And I can tell you numerous times with people that I've spoken to are like, "Oh, you're a jerk," or "I don't like what you're saying." And I'm like, "Well, tell me, well, okay, I'm sorry you feel that way. Let's try to, work this out. Let's try to negotiate this. Please tell me." And usually it has absolutely nothing to do with what I said, or it's completely off. And then I've had times to where when people were dumb enough or patient enough or open enough to where we could actually negotiate and work through things, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, you're right. Actually, that is true. Yeah, I do. Oh shit. Yeah, you're right. Oh, I didn't think of it like that and look at it this way." I was like, "Yeah, okay, that's why I said what I said." Or it's another one of those examples of like I gave earlier, where what I'm saying is literally the exact straightforward definition of the exact word or action they're doing, but they're like, "No." So then at that point, there's nothing you can do, because if they don't even know what they're doing, then there's just no hope of communication, because they have no, basically, in order to be able to really communicate and to actually be able to understand and to actually be able to listen, a person has to have the ability to differentiate self and other, which means they have to function from a place beyond their just subjective emotional reaction of like, I will get what I want, I don't get what I want. Basically, they have to be able to differentiate. Here's who I am and what I think and what I feel and what I believe and why. And then there are other people in the world that are different, that have different experiences, that have different reference points, that have different things, different extrapolations. Of course, there's similarities because we're human, but there's many differences in the world that are not me. Okay, so then now you've been able to, this is self and this is not, this is other, or this is a different object. Oh, so then now I have two different things. So then let me be able to then listen and hear and say, okay, these are my reference points. These are my things. What are theirs? Oh, are they the same? Maybe, maybe not. Are they different? Maybe, maybe not. Does it make sense to me? Maybe, maybe not. And if you don't have that capacity, then you can't listen. You can't hear. I don't think you can have empathy. Definitely can't have compassion. Definitely can't really help people. You really can't relate and exist in a very human way at all, because you're existing almost exclusively where your reference points and data points for reality is what I feel and what I want right now. And whether I get what I want determines how I feel. And if I chronically don't get what I want over a long enough period of time, now I'm grumpy, bitter, angry, resentful, conspiratorial, whatever, fill in the blank. And that's pretty much an extremely low level of human functioning. And honestly, it's mean to say, but for a lot of people, that's where they are the vast majority of the time, which is good if they're getting what they want and things are harmonious, then cool. Uh, and then for most people, for a lot of people, especially nowadays, my generation and the younger generation, they're really not, because they don't even know their worldview is just a series of contradictions, where it's like, and even spiritual people, most of the time, their worldview is just a series of contradictions, which I'd already discussed in other videos. And having yourself be a series of contradictions is the absence of integrity. A structure that doesn't have integrity doesn't have stability. A person that's egoless doesn't have stability or integrity. If you don't have stability and you don't have integrity, then you don't have power. Or if you do have a form of power, it's very distorted and it's usually going to lead to a very negative outcome for everyone involved. Um, Structures need to have integrity. If they have integrity, then they can have stability. If they have integrity and stability, then they have a strong foundation on which things can be built. They have predictability, which is reliability. And then out of that order, then freedom and some degree of structure and development is able to occur. If those things are not there, or a person is egoless or selfless or any other synonym for disembodied or disempowered, then they are not going to be very effective within the world. They're not going to be able to listen. They're not going to be able to hear. So they're not going to be able to develop understanding. Because they can't develop understanding, they won't develop clarity. Because they can't develop clarity, they won't be very successful. They won't be very efficient. They won't be very effective. Because they won't be very successful, efficient, or effective, they'll be very unhappy. They'll be very low energy, be very dissatisfied, which means they're going to need a lot more stimulation, because they're going to have a lot more fear in their system, which means they're going to be much more stuck in the lowest, most base aspects of their human organism. Everyone, let's just take a moment to applaud and congratulate Moths to Flame, who is apparently the most egoless person in the world, and they are better than most people because of it. Let's all just take a moment and applaud them and congratulate them for this amazing achievement, this profound, uh, amazing achievement. I gotta give that a heart, a thumbs up, 100 emoji. Like, how did you do it? Can you teach us? I mean, if there's even a you, how can I do it? How can we do it? Can you come on the live stream and teach us your secret ways, or what? I mean, um, please share your secrets. We need to know, because I think if there were more egoless people, that would just, whoa, Then we would have a utopia. It would be like Eckhart Tolle says, we'd be able to create a new world. Oh yeah, that's true when the time is right. I understand. Absolutely. Um, yeah, you can't force, can't force the timing. So totally get that. Us people with egos are just we can't understand the timing. Um, yeah. Anywho, um, yeah, I think you're right. I don't think we'll get it. It's better to just don't waste your time and energy with us peasants. Um, so yeah, I'll read another part of that post that I was talking about earlier that I think describes and explains why. Because people ask, why does this occur more now than before? Why is this occurring? Why is this getting more predominant? So I think, of course, we can speculate about the motives because maybe we'll never really know for sure. And I've talked about this in terms of conspiracy theories or these types of things. I think the easiest, most likely explanation for a lot of things is just pure greed and exploitation and the desire to consolidate power control and wealth in the hands of uh, fewer and fewer people. I think that's the easiest, most solid theory for a lot of things because that's what's happened over the last few years. I mean, pretty massive wealth transfer, um, for sure. So I think rather than getting into grand theories and new world orders and one world governments and shadow governments and all these other things that maybe have validity, I think just the easiest, lowest hanging fruit is just straight up pure human greed and stupidity. And we're entering into an age where sex, gender, and race are being ramped up and exploited for profit. By dividing and subdividing and polarizing these demographics, you create new demographics and new markets to sell new types of products to and create kind of an ideological marketplace. Because the thing is with greed and these types of industries, they always have to be growing and consuming more, 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 more. Like I was saying earlier with people that are getting in these weird sexual deviance things, the more you do, the more you have to do. And it's like the more you consume, the emptier you get, so the more you have to consume. And it's just it's like the more you feed the demon, the more you have to feed the demon. And I think more or less a lot of the times this is what's driving a lot of what we're seeing in the world right now, which is why a lot of these things are a lot worse. So by subdividing and exploiting people's sex, their gender, and their race, you're just they're mostly being done to create demographics and new markets and new products and an ideological marketplace where people are just so divided and subdivided and really at odds with each other all the time, and they're at odds in themselves. And then there's another piece of it where there is a large attack on the West in what used to be kind of a democratic society, whereas these quote unquote progressive agendas are more or less Trojan horses that create chaos, confusion, conflict, and social decline. And that might sound like a stretch, but it isn't if you actually look at that's what's occurred and that's what's increasingly occurring. The more prevalent these ideas and ideologies become and the more prevalent in our social sphere they are becoming. So it's like if this thing increases and then this thing increases while these things increase, maybe it's a big coincidence. Sure, could be. Could be just a grand cosmic joke that is just hilarious and we don't get it. Or maybe there could actually be a lot to it that these huge corporations are all team up and conglomerate and are all putting out the same messages at the same time, which are creating the same effects. And economically these things are occurring, sociologically these things are occurring. Maybe it's all connected. Maybe it's related. I don't know. This is just my theory. And when you look at things such as DEI and ESG scores and how interrelated that is within the financial sphere and how connected that is with all of these social agendas being pushed by all of these companies that, let's face it, only exist for profit. Like they don't care about people. If we look at all of history, they don't care about people. They care about profit for their shareholders. That's what corporations exist for, is to create profit for their shareholders. And then there's an open declared policy to shift our to shift our society from a shareholder system to a stakeholder system, which that's a whole other conversation to break down those terms and those differences and those dynamics. But ultimately, the tool for a lot of it is these DEI and ESG scores. So then it becomes, at a certain point, it becomes the question of at what scale does a person evaluate and analyze something, and how many variables and data points are they able to include in that analysis to then inform their opinion. And I think the sad reality is that most people focus solely on their subjective emotional gratification in the moment. And that's more or less only the data points they consider based on what the news and the media tells them to consider. I think large in part, this is why our culture is the way that it is right now, and why it very likely will not improve, and why it will very likely just lead to more conflict. Just like there's so many examples of polarization to where if you express any derivation or deviation from the approved agenda, you are immediately ostracized and shot down. Basically, what happens is that people are enthusiastically participating in their own demise because it feels good now, because that's what the news and the media are telling them to do, because it feels good now. And people function in this way where the only variables they consider is what they're told by the media, and their scope of their worldview is what they feel right now in the moment and how that might support their self-image. So then you have institutions and medias and societal fabrics that are just directly stimulating that. So of course it's this. It's a perfect match. It's a perfect fit. And then when we see the direct outcomes and results of those things that are more or less lowering the quality of life for everyone across basically every metric. And if you don't understand that, then just look at any socioeconomic quality of life metric, at least in America, and they're all doing this. Is that a coincidence that they do this as these ideologies do this? Or is it just I don't know. So I think that's an easy way to encapsulate, or maybe a not so easy way to encapsulate everything that I've been talking about in this whole live stream, especially as it pertains to online dating, because it's related. Because the reasons why men and women on both sides of the extremes that I'm talking about, the vast majority of the time, the reason why they're behaving in those ways is because of these socially engineered dynamics that confuse them, that weaken them, that demoralize them, and cause them to act against their own conscience and completely get rid of their conscience. Which, when you do that, you really undermine that person's health. I'll just say that. And at least for a man, I'll say this. So all the young men listening, and all the young men that ask me about Jing and ask me about sexual energy and ask me about all these things, this is where the rubber hits the road. As a man, the more you just follow your feelings and follow your emotions and behave in demoralized sort of ways, basically the more you behave in the way in which society kind of tells you to and encourages you to, playing video games all the time and jerking off and smoking weed and just indulging your senses and your feelings all the time, and the more progressive and emotional and sensitive and all that stuff you become, the weaker your kidneys become, the more dispersed those fields become, and the faster the jing will burn up, and the more the jing will be wasted. And then anxiety, depression, weakness, lack of focus, lack of willpower all result as a side effect of those things. And that's what society more or less encourages and tells us to do as men. And those are the exact things that undermine our health at a fundamental level. Similar thing is true with women, but it's a little bit different. Um, but basically, what I'm saying is many of these social dynamics absolutely destroy people's healths, 100%. But again, in the moment, it might feel really good. In the moment, it might be very rewarding. But again, what's the scope? What's the width that we're gonna look at the subject from? If it's just right now, then sure, it's gonna always probably feel good right now. But over time, it's gonna not lead to a great place. Doing heavy drugs feels good in the moment, but the long-term consequences aren't so good. The way it really rewires your physiology and screws you up um, is not a great thing. So yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to cover in this live stream. It's things that have been kind of kicking around my head for a while now, and I've been trying to think about how to clarify it, and I just figured I would do it this morning and get it out there. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all the comments, and I think this was the liveliest chat session that I've seen. It seems like primarily a male audience today, which I think um, probably my audience is somewhat male, anyways. Um, which, whatever. Uh, can I have a consultation with you? How much is a consultation? I would say send me an email through my website or send me a DM on Instagram, and we can discuss it from there. So yeah, I actually did make a video specifically about consultations and gave a direct link to that, but actually the engagement and the views and the click-through rate on that video was extremely low, which was interesting because it was at a time where my live stream views were like way up. So it was like people care enough about what I'm saying to listen to 2-3 hours of live stream, but not enough, I guess, to pay money for a consultation or even watch a video about that. Um, but I get it. We're all human. We have the human condition, and maybe they just watch the live stream because they don't like me or they think I'm a jerk. Which, oddly enough, there are people that do that. There are people that make these negative comments about something I said at the end of a live stream, and I'm like, you sat through the whole live stream of this person that you don't agree with, that you don't like, that you think is a jerk or obviously kind of a low life. But you just spent 2 hours listening to them talk. I'm like, uh, there's a lot of people I don't like, but I don't spend my day engaging with them. There's a lot of foods. Oh, I don't know. I'm just saying. There's a lot of food I don't like, but I don't spend all day eating it. Like maybe I don't think McDonald's is the highest quality food. Okay, so I don't eat it. Done. I don't spend all day thinking about, you know what? McDonald's is so gross. McDonald's is terrible. I should go eat some. Then I'm eating it and I'm like, I'm going to leave a negative review. Okay, I just ate 7 cheeseburgers and a Big Mac and drank a Coke, but McDonald's is a for-profit corporation that's ruining the planet, and their food's low quality and it's disgusting and it's creating obesity. Da, 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 da. Yeah, but this is horrible. It's the worst, and it's a piece of. They should be ruined from the planet. I'm leaving 1 star. It's like, really? But you just you just went and ate 6 Big Macs and 4 small fries and a large Coke. and you're eating it while you're typing your negative review, but then they're the bad guy, but then they're the evil people. Okay. Um, it just reminds me of the last thing that I'll say here, which is I've said this many times in many different videos. Most people will sit around and talk shit about people that are doing something. People in power, people in positions of power, people with wealth, people with influence, people that are successful. Most people will just crabs in a barrel, try to shoot them down. And if you've ever tried to do anything, you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go try and do something and then watch how people react. Most people will not be supportive. Most people will not be on your side. If you really want to change your life and you really want to do crazy good things, most people won't be on board because they'll make it about them and they'll take it personally or whatever. Or maybe you're lucky and you'll have really great people in your life who will support you in that. Cool. My point is that if you took these, couch critics and armchair philosophers and people that are so against all of these things in the world, if you took them and put them in these positions of power, I absolutely guarantee they would very likely do the same bad things or even worse. Because like we could sit here and talk about all the members of Congress that are doing insider trading and having like massive financial gain from all this insider knowledge, and they're shifting policy and they're doing all this greed, like, super PAC kind of stuff and corporate donations and lobbyists and all these things. And obviously that's terrible. And that's really had a negative effect on our overall political system and our country in general. But the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of people, I think if you put them in that same position, they would do the same exact thing. Because it's easy to have an opinion when you don't actually have to do anything for it. Like I can give you an example of one of the ladies I was talking about earlier who accused me of not listening and whatever. She would just be argumentative about subjects all the time. And I'm like, you don't even know anything about this subject. Yeah, but still, I just think what you're saying is wrong. And I'm like, but you don't know anything about this. Yeah, but it's different than what's on the news. So it's crazy. And I'm like, yeah, but you've spent no time or energy on this subject. Yeah, but still, I know what you're saying is wrong. I'm like, that's not really how the world works, but okay. I mean, that is how it works now, actually. People have all these opinions and all these views that they arrive at, and then what's invested in them is very little. So that's why I always encourage people that have strong views and strong opinions and, ideas about how things should be. Go do something. Go test those ideas. Go validate them. Go start a business. Do something, create something, innovate something, whether it's music or art or a business thing or some type of whatever in the world. Go get a raise, get a new job, get a different job, whatever that might be. Learn a new hobby and try to be good at something. Like try to be good at literally anything. Try to be the best you can be at that thing. And then see what your beliefs or your thoughts or your ideology or whatever, see what that is. Because people that do those things and go through those things tend to have a different kind of mindset because they've gone through those things and they've actually had to test their things. But again, it's easy to be very virtuous and high-minded when nothing is required of you. When it's your skin in the game, now all of a sudden it's not a thing. So anyways, yeah, definitely lots of defense stocks being insider traded as of late. There's actually an account on Instagram that follows the trading and the financial activity of politicians and people in Congress. And the website, or it's an account for a website, and you can go to the website and you can see what these people are trading and what they're doing and when, and you can kind of wager and understand what's actually happening in the world through doing that. So it feels like, the cheat code to reality in a way. So anyways, Thanks again for tuning in and really appreciate the support. And I will talk to you soon.